All right. Welcome, everybody, to the show. This is Finance Essentials with Danny Hudson. I am your host, Danny Hudson. This is the final show of 2020. And boy, what a boring, uneventful year that no one is ever going to remember about. I'd be surprised if 10 years from now people are thinking, man, what happened in 2020? There wasn't a lot going on then. Sorry, I just make it a stupid joke. But this is the last episode of 2020. I'm super excited. I think it's going to be a great show. One of the things, sorry, let me turn my mic down a little bit here. There we go. One of the things, as I'm sure if you're watching on YouTube, we still have the tree up. We've got Gigi and Granddad are coming to visit in a couple of days, so the kiddos have a couple of gifts left to unwrap and that kind of thing, and so we want to make sure that we keep the tree up to still kind of keep a little bit of Christmas spirit. But despite the popular support, the next show probably will not have a Christmas tree in it. I know several of you guys are going to complain and you're going to be really disappointed, but the tree is going to come down. Sorry, I know, but don't worry. Wait until the day after Thanksgiving next year and it'll be right back up again. Actually, it'll be a different one. We got a bigger tree for 50% off at Home Depot. My wife actually tried to negotiate to get the one that was on display to get it even cheaper. So it was already 50% off and she thought that maybe she could get a cheaper version of the one that they were using for the display. So, but yeah, so we got another tree and it'll be up next year, and so be on the lookout for that in exactly, I don't know, what is that, 330 days or something. But anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. Thanks for listening. As always, I get a lot of great feedback from you guys. I'm super excited. I actually have next week's show already lined up to kick off Entrepreneur Week. I think it's going to be a great show. It'll be a lot of fun. We'll get to learn about kind of some entrepreneurs and really kind of how they run their businesses, how important finance is, how COVID has impacted them. So I'm super stoked. I think it's going to be great. A lot of good shows coming up, and I know too, based off of the feedback that I've gotten from several people as well, they really want me to do more interviews. I don't know if they're being nice and saying I do good at interviews, or they're just tired of listening to me. It could be both. We'll assume that they like listening to me, but they think that I do well with interviews, and so they just want to pump my ego a little bit more. But we'll go with that one. But yeah, so thank you guys for tuning in every week. Again, follow us on social media. We're on all of the platforms. Also, to go over to the financeessentials.io site. Make sure you sign up for the finance cheat sheet there. Get added onto the newsletter. One of the things too that I guess I'll go ahead and mention that I really want to do is I have signed up. And maybe I'm an insane person for doing this, but I have signed up for the 365-day challenge for 2021. And what that means is that I'm going to be putting out some form of content every single day in the year 2021. Now, I'm hoping I'll be able to make it the full year, but we'll see how it goes. But I have signed up for this. So go over to the site, get signed up for the newsletter. I'm probably going to start a blog on the site. Hopefully I'll stick with the podcast on a weekly basis, and then fill the gaps in with a newsletter, maybe a link to the blog, a blog post, maybe it might be a short video. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but there's going to be some form of content that I'm going to provide on a daily basis. Now, hopefully you guys consume all of it, but if not, that's okay. You can pick and choose too. That's perfectly all right. But it's going to be out there, and hopefully it'll be able to really be able to help provide some value to you guys. So today's show, to wrap up the final episode of the year, it's probably going to be a little controversial, but I don't care. I mean, it's my show, so I'm the only one that gets to talk on it, so I don't really care. It will be a little bit controversial, but that's okay, because I think it's good. I think it's good to end the year, in my opinion, on a topic it's sort of related to the one that I did last week with DoorDash, but it has a lot to do with what I consider compassion capitalism. right? So compassion capitalism can be looked at several ways. There's internal compassion. So think about the hierarchy that you have within your organization and with your enterprise and within your company, and how you really kind of treat your internal employees and the benefits that you get from that. But also compassion in how you treat your customers and how you treat the overall market, how you treat the overall business environment, but then also too how you go above and beyond to really help those that could really use that type of help. Because us as capitalists and us as business owners and us as working professionals and successful individuals, as I have mentioned before on this podcast, we have a moral obligation to be successful, right? We have a moral obligation to be as successful and make as much money as we possibly can, because what that does is it gives us the ability to be able to help those who are not as lucky and as in a fortunate position as us. So that, I believe, is also a part of compassion capitalism. But what I wanted to do is establish the definitions, some definitions that we're going to use and we're going to play into right at the beginning, right? So go ahead and establish what they mean, so that way you guys understand the terminology that I'm using, you understand the position that I'm coming from, and it won't necessarily create instant contention and discussion over meanings of words, right? Because there's a very good chance that when it comes to capitalism, I have a different definition of it than what you would have, and so on and so forth. So what I want to do is just kind of pre-establish what's, a couple of definitions. And so the textbook definition of capitalism is an economic system where the means of production and distribution are privately owned, right? So they could be publicly owned in the sense that they have shareholders, so on and so forth, but they're not owned and operated by the government. And another definition, this one I don't think would have a lot of real contention, but one of the things that I think a lot of people do is they mistake this for capitalism, right? Which is cronyism. And the definition of cronyism is favoritism shown to old friends without regard of their qualifications. So think about a lot of positions where, and maybe even the companies that you've worked at, right? Where, Billy got the management role over me, but he's only been here for 3 months, and it turns out that he's the director's cousin, or whatever it might be, some nepotism, that kind of thing. In the economic sense, when I usually will reference to cronyism, it's usually companies who, I guess maybe the military-industrial complex is probably a decent place to start, right? So a lot of your large military contractors, they spend millions of dollars lobbying, and then they get hundreds of millions of dollars in government contracts. And so the system of picking winners and losers, I tend to associate to cronyism, not capitalism. But I do believe that there are a lot of people who look at capitalism and they would assign the definition of cronyism to that, right? Maybe crony capitalism, or however you want to go from there. So what I wanted to do is establish those two definitions, right? Because going forward, think about what I'm referring to in the sense of those two, rather than confusing the two, mixing up the definitions, and so on and so forth. And what that'll do is, I think that'll put us on a level playing field when it comes to understanding. And so that being said, the reason why I wanted to do this show is over the past week or so, I've come across several instances where I believe that compassion capitalism came up, and it was something that really just jumped out to me, where I thought that it was valuable to do a show on it. The first one was an episode of the Tom Woods Show, who he's an economist. Well, I guess he wasn't an economist. He has a PhD in history, but he does a lot regarding the economy and so on and so forth. And he was actually interviewing John Mackey. And if you don't know who John Mackey is, he is the CEO of Whole Foods. and he's been there for a long time. And Whole Foods was not that long ago actually bought out by Amazon. And so John Mackey had written a couple of books, and one of them was Conscious Leadership, and the other one was Conscious Capitalism. Conscious Leadership, I believe, was the one that came out in September, so a few months ago. So it's very recent. And on the show, he told a story that really stood out to me. And the reason why it really stood out to me was because I believe that it's very important as business owners, as working professionals, as executives, to look at examples like this and find ways that we're able to apply that in our own professional world. So the story was they were in negotiations with a lot of farmers, right? If you guys aren't super familiar with Whole Foods, they are generally the most expensive grocery store that you'll probably go to, and a lot of that is because they really take extra care in choosing their suppliers. They really take care in selecting organic, really as environmental friendly options as you possibly can get. And so there was a circumstance with Mackey where they were currently in negotiations with some suppliers. I don't remember what the specific animal was, but what they found is that they had the shareholder meeting, right? And so at the shareholder meeting, a lot of people come in from all over the country, I guess maybe all over the world, and they're listening to the executives, tell them, hey, this is what our plan is. This is where we're at. This is where, what we've got coming up. Here's our performance so far. Here's how we're tracking versus our budget. And then they give them a lot of, insight into kind of how the company's being run. But what they found is that they were getting a lot of protests from PETA. And so PETA was outside of the shareholder meetings, and Mackey was basically like, man, we've got these shareholders here, and I'd really like to be able to conduct a shareholder meeting, but these guys are really screwing everything up. And so the people that worked for him were like, well, maybe we'll just get them out of here, right? We'll get them out of here. And he was like, no. He's like, it's okay. Just bring a couple of them in, and let's hear what they have to say. And so to kind of skip to where the end of it is that he started to have regular email communication with one of the leaders of PETA that was there. And he asked he basically said, why are you bothering me, but you're not bothering a lot of these other organizations and companies? And she said that it's because she knew that he would listen. And so I thought that really spoke, volumes. And so what he did is he brought in some of these guys to really help them understand from their perspective, because they knew that he wasn't going to go vegan, but it was important for them to be able to be as hospitable and caring about the animals as possible. So he actually brought in, several PETA representatives, and then he brought in a lot of their supply chains, and they really broke down, well, what do you need to get up to this level, and so on and so forth. And they had PETA, but, and so what it was a very strong collaboration. And what it did was it made the customers happy, right? Because now they know where these products are being sourced from. They know that it's meeting a certain level and requirement that's going to be able to be a lot more humane for the animals. They also brought in the suppliers, right? Because they're the farmers, they're the ones that are actually farming, these meat products and so on and so forth. And so what they did is that he really took a caring aspect to it, and really tried to do what he could to make everybody happy. Now, we're never going to make everybody happy, but that example really stood out because he was able to understand what it was that the customer wanted, and he was able to provide that, and he did it by listening. And so, and showing compassion to an organization that, to be honest, I find PETA to be extremely obnoxious. And if anybody is listening and they're a member of PETA, I apologize, but I personally think that your organization is pretty obnoxious. But Mackie brought them on board, and so I respect that, and I respect the fact that they really provided him a lot of good feedback, and so that really stood out to me. To know that, hey, that sometimes there are people that are obnoxious, and you might think that they might not listen to what you have to say, and they might not collaborate. But you show that caring, and you show that compassion, and you show that conscientiousness there, and it really makes you a good leader. And then the other one that I listened to was actually a story on NPR. And what it was talking about was it was talking about compassion in the medical field. And it was talking about all of the benefits that a lot of hospitals and medical centers get when they show compassion towards their patients. And it's not even necessarily, inviting them to your house for Christmas, right? It's just asking them about their families, wanting to know them a little bit more on a personal level, and really making that connection and showing compassion with them, considering the fact of what it is that they're going through. And the part that really stood out to me, and this was new, and I know that there are people that are listening that are in the medical field. But it really has a strong benefit to your bottom line as well. And when they were talking about it, the main reason for it was a lot of times was because they were more inclined to listen to their doctors, and they were more inclined to come back. And so one of the things that they found was that it really cut down on unnecessary follow-ups, unnecessary trips, and people actually listened and they took their medication when they were supposed to. And so it really cut down on a lot of additional cost because you weren't having to necessarily follow up with these people as often. And so what I did was I did a little bit of research to see if there were other examples of, especially compassion capitalism in the medical field. And so what I did was I found an article from HMC HealthWorks, and it was talking about comorbidities that cost everybody more. And a quick little reading, patients, their families, public, private health insurers, and other stakeholders are all impacted by the rise in people living with multiple chronic conditions. This often leads to poor health outcomes and an increase in healthcare utilization and associated healthcare costs. There are savings about 9 to 16% to be had if there's a greater integration between the treatment of behavioral and medical health services. Physicians are on board with treating this population. About 94% agree that integrating behavioral care into medical care directly improves patient outcomes, particularly when they see their patients following through on seeking additional services following their referral. Furthermore, studies show that concurrent and coordinated treatments of medical and behavioral conditions is important to good outcomes. And so that really stood out to me because what it showed is that it showed that rather than a doctor coming in and talking to somebody for 10 or 15 minutes and then kicking him out the door, you don't really gain credibility. You don't really have that relationship there. And unless you're saying, hey, look, you need to go to the emergency room right now, chances are the people that are leaving that office aren't necessarily going to take your advice that well. But what we're finding is that even in the medical field, which I guess the medical field is probably a prime example of compassion, where the people really want to be heard and they really want to be felt like they're cared about. And so a lot of these additional comorbidities, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, you can really help take care of if you're able to allow somebody to really show that additional compassion there. And so it's really great to see circumstances like that. And again, coming from a finance perspective, if and somebody who really supports compassion capitalism and who really believes that we have an obligation to do what's right for the customer, when I read something like that, I mean, that checks all the marks, right? Because you're not investing tons in capital, right? There's not a lot of capital expenditures there. You're not building a giant new wing of a hospital. You're not increasing staff. You don't have a specific person that's coming in there to talk to them. What you have is you have a staff that's established that understands the compassion aspect to it of these patients, and it's increasing the effectiveness of the service, and it's increasing the overall product quality, and it actually has a positive impact on the bottom line, which is pretty much what all businesses really like to experience. And so I thought that that was super great. And one of the other parts too that I really wanted to understand a little bit more of, and I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the show, which is internal compassion, right? If you guys can all do me a favor and close your eyes, well, or I guess you don't have to close your eyes, especially if you're driving. That would be a terrible idea. But think about probably the worst place that you have ever worked at. I can think about probably the worst place that I ever worked at. And then think about like the top 3 reasons why you left that place, or if you're still there, the top 3 reasons of why you would want to leave that place. All right, I'll give you 5 seconds. All right, you probably didn't need 5 seconds to think of the top 3 worst things about the worst place you ever worked at. But my guess is that out of those top 3 things, money probably wasn't one of them. It probably had a lot to do with direct management. It probably had a lot to do with how you felt that you were being treated. It probably had a lot to do with the fact that you weren't respected, that you didn't feel as though you were really contributing and being a part of the overall team, which that tends to be a big thing when it comes to workplace environments, right? We really want to be able to feel like we belong. And so what I did was I found an article, and this was by The Greater Good. This was a study done by Berkeley. And it was titled "Why Compassion in Business Makes Sense." And so what it talks about is, stress brings high healthcare and turnover costs. In a study of employees for various organizations, healthcare expenditures for employees with high levels of stress were 46% greater than at similar organizations without high levels of stress. In particular, workplace stress had been linked to coronary heart disease. And then there's impact on turnover, which is 52% of employees report that workplace stress had led them to look for a new job, decline a promotion, or even leave a job. And so when we talk about internal compassion capitalism, that right there, just showing a little bit of humanity and really helping to lead your organization and lead your company, not just to your customers, but also to your own employees, can also increase your bottom line. A healthy employee and a happy employee is a much more productive employee. I'm sure a lot of times with you guys, if you're really feeling productive, you probably can think about multiple jobs where you were probably a lot more productive when you were happy and you felt like you were doing something and you were contributing to something than when you weren't happy. But the big one here is turnover, right? I mean, turnover goes directly to the bottom line. Think about jobs where you were at where somebody left after 20 years or 15 years. I mean, a lot of times the knowledge that's gone is huge. I mean, it's irreplaceable. And then it comes into the fact that now you're burdening other members of the team with the person's work while they find a replacement. And then you're talking about time and money searching for a new employee, a lot of your standard turnover costs. But that is also going to run you additional costs on the bottom line too. So compassion capitalism is not just important to your external customers, but it's also very important to your internal customers as well, which is your employees. And so because I did the show last week where I was talking about the fundraiser that was done by Chef Gruel, I thought that it would be really great to look at some examples, I think, of compassion capitalism, and one of them is a company that I'm almost certain that a lot of you guys have actually heard of, and it's a company called Gravity Payments. The CEO there, his name is Dan Price, and this was a couple of years ago, and what he did is he took a huge hit to his own salary as the CEO. And what he did was he increased the minimum wage of his company up to $70,000, right? So it didn't matter what you did, you were minimally making $70,000. So you were an executive assistant, $70,000. If you were, say, an entry-level finance person, you were making $64,000. You got bumped up to $70,000. Now, there were some people that had issues with it, and they left. They left, which is fine. That's one of the things that's nice about a position like that. Whereas if you're not happy with the company and the decision that they're making, you can leave. You can do that. But it also helped make a lot of other people in that company happy. And so he took a lot of heat for it. A lot of support, a lot of heat. But one of the things too, though, that he also realized is that there were a lot of people who supported him in that. Now, I can guarantee you that Gravity Payments is not the cheapest. They're not going to be the cheapest option, in that payments field. And part of it is because their labor costs are going to be higher. But you know what? There are a lot of people out there that actually are going to say, hey, you know what? That guy supports and takes care of his employees. I'm okay spending a few extra bucks on my payment system and rather than sending it off to somebody else who, and I think some CEOs tend to get a bad rap because a few of them get paid way too much money, but they might go, well, I'd rather use this guy because he takes care of his employees rather than spend an extra 10 or 12 bucks knowing that it's just going to go to the CEO's pocket. And so his business actually blew up. It was a very good strategic business decision. But the thing that really stood out to me is what happened whenever COVID hit. And what he did was he actually gathered all of his employees and he said, what do you guys think I should do here? I don't want to let people go because a lot of times what ends up happening is that companies will typically tend to immediately look at the balance sheet, right? They want to look at where their cash position is, and then they might make excessive decisions. Say they start letting people go, right? And then it turns out it was only an issue for a couple of months, and then those people are gone. They're nervous about coming back. It's bad for morale. And so what he did was he actually put it up to the employees, and the employees said, well, we'll take voluntary pay cuts. And he was actually surprised. He took his employees all took voluntary pay cuts, so that way no one would actually lose their job. And so he was very skeptical of the decision, but he was like, all right, well, if that's what you guys want to do, that's what we're going to do. And so it turned out that it ended up working out tremendously. Everybody there kind of did their thing. They took their pay cut, like they agreed to. And then by summertime, everybody was already back up to where they were originally. And he was actually able to reimburse them what they had lost in the meantime. And so I think that there's a lot to be said there when it comes to leadership and when it comes to compassion. And I think that one of the things that he said, when he mentioned that leaders will do layoffs deeper and quicker than needed, he said, highlighting that it's usually the best way to recover and turn things around, but it's not always the best business decision. So kudos to Dan Price. I was a little skeptical whenever he first kind of instituted the policy. I'm a big supporter of it, because no one forced him to do it. He did that because he thought that was the best thing to do for his employees. So kudos to him. And then the other one is actually, I don't know if you guys know who Dave Portnoy is. He's basically the boss of Barstool Sports. And so he's really big on Twitter. He's really big when it comes to sports. He's obviously got a huge following. But there was an article that was done about him, and the title of it is "Barstool Sports is helping struggling small businesses far more efficiently than the government." And so it goes on to say, Dave Portnoy, the founder and president of popular media company Barstool Sports, has vocally opposed the shutdowns, which I think at this point, I think most people are. That seems to be kind of the consensus. Most people are kind of looking at them and going, man, like this was not a good idea. Let's figure out what we can do to get these businesses going again. But beyond criticism alone, Portnoy is rising to the occasion, using his reach to provide real assistance for small business owners. Last week, I guess this is probably 2 weeks ago now, but he launched a fund to help bail out small businesses and alerted his 1.8 million Twitter followers to the cause. It seems he is spending his money out of his own pocket and challenging others to do the same. They say when a strong man takes a stand, the spines of others are stiffened, and that certainly seems to be the case here. And that line really stood out, that when a strong man takes a stand, the spines of others are stiffened, right? So basically what that's saying is that when there's a leader that steps up, then others are more inclined to follow. And so what Dave did was he said, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to do what I can to help out, these small businesses. They're not related to him. He doesn't know who they are. He just knows that it's important to keep these businesses open as much as possible. And so social media influencers across Twitter began donating to the fund, many of them unsolicited. Michael Rapino, the CEO of Live Nation, and if you guys are familiar with Live Nation, they basically manage a lot of concert venues and things, and think about the situation that they're in, right? I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have been to any concerts this year, but my guess is if the number was more than 2 and you were outside of the state of Florida, then that's a pretty high number. But he donated $50 or $50,000, right? And so Dana White, the president of UFC, Gary Vaynerchuk of Vayner Sports joined in, and so there were a lot of other people. And Hannah goes on to say that everyday Americans are stepping up to giving generously out of what they have to help others. Now, obviously, I didn't donate 50 grand, but I threw a little bit in there because I've been one of the people that have been fortunate enough to not to lose a paycheck. And so last I looked, the fund was up to about $9 million. And one of the things that Hannah mentions when she talks about the title of the article is far more efficiently than the government. And so when you think about the recent holdups that have been going on in this 5,600 page stimulus, bill, whatever you want to call it, that's basically sending people $600, or then it's $2,000, and it's based off of 2019 tax returns, so it's very irrelevant to people in their current circumstances in 2020, and government's arguing about it, and they're fighting with each other because of what's on page 462, and then these guys are arguing about what's on page 4,411. And in the meantime, these businesses are going out, they're going under, right? And so not only are the owners not having any revenue and they're not able to pay their bills and keep their lights on, but their employees can't either. And so people like Dave and people like Chef Gruel have really stepped up. I know Chef Gruel started sending out his, and he's actually sending out $601, to people who requested it. And I believe last count is that they were up over $250,000. And what Dave is doing is he's basically saying, look, if you're a small business, send me an email, tell us your story, and we'll see what we can do. And so, I mean, these are literally people whose businesses are going under. They're sending out an email, and then, as if they, if they go along with the story, because you try to weed out people as best you can. Obviously, some scammers are going to get through, but you try to weed people out as best you can. But then these guys are PayPal money, right? They get $5,000 to help keep their bills, to get caught up on whatever they can and get them to the next 2 months, and it's handled so much more efficiently than having to go through branches of government. And again, they're basing it off of 2019 rather than current circumstances. So if you made a ton of money in 2019 and you're out of work right now, you're probably going to be screwed. And so the system that's there is not made to be efficient, right? And so when you're talking about somebody who's showing compassion capitalism, that these guys that have the type of money like this and being able to do that kind of thing. And like I tell you guys, I want the listeners of this show to be the next Dave, right? To be the next Dan Price, where you guys are starting up companies and you're saying, hey, I can one up Dan. I'm going to institute a $75,000 minimum wage at my job, and so all my employees are going to start at $75,000. That's awesome. That's what we want to be able to do. And so I was having a discussion with somebody on Twitter, and the topic of the stimulus bill came up, right? Because it's $900 billion. And their point was, well, government is the only one that can actually help manage and distribute that amount of money, right? Because the money is such a large amount, no one has the capacity to be able to deliver that. And the issue that I take with that is that if you're thinking that there's something that would benefit somebody else and that the federal government is the only organization that's big enough to be able to handle it, then it's too big. It's too big. If they are the only one, because it's going to be ripe with fraud, it's going to be ripe with waste, it's going to be ripe with not getting to who it needs to go to, not being acceptable, it's not enough, it's too late, it's too, whatever the circumstances are. If they are the only group that you think that can handle something, then it's just too big. That's just the way it is. They would be much better off saying, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to send it based off of population. We're going to send out $900 billion or whatever down based off of population to, maybe they even go sub-state level, right? And let it be handled more on a local level. Because if you think that maybe your state is also too big to be able to manage that, then it probably is. It probably is. If your state is the only one that can handle something, then it's probably too big. And so what Dave and other folks like him are able to provide is a service where they can say, look, send us an email. We'll send you some money. And so these are some good examples to me of what compassion capitalism is, because I think capitalists typically tend to get a bad rap where people think that they're selfish and they're greedy. But it's okay to be greedy, right? Because if you're greedy, you want to make a lot of money. How you provide money or how you get money is by providing value, right? Because people are taking your service or your product and they're exchanging money to you because they value that item more than the money that they have. And then you can use that. You can turn that around to be able to help others. So thank you for for listening this week. I rambled on a little bit longer than I had planned to, so I'm going to cut it a little bit short here. But I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for listening. I think this was episode 15 or something like that. Apparently like 75% of podcasts never make it past episode 7. So thank you for sticking with me. But we'll talk to you next week for the first episode of Entrepreneur Week. And we'll see you then. All right. Bye.